Every August, the county I lived in would throw a huge fair. There were games, rides, shows, food, all that good stuff for about 2 weeks. Then they would take it down and I'd have to wait another year. I think this happened in 2008. I was 7 at the time, and I was just tall enough to ride something I'd wanted to go on for a long time. I convinced my mom to let me, and my cousin Jared ride him. Jared was 2 years older than me, and Mom trusted us to be safe, so we ran off to ride it. After the ride, Jared had to go to the bathroom. The fair only had porta potties, so I had to wait outside for him. And that's when this man walked up. He said I was supposed to go with him. I asked him why, and he just said my parents said I had to. Now, I know I should have ran away or got Jared or something, but this guy said he knew my parents. It's an obvious lie looking back. He didn't even say their names, but I thought if he knew my parents, he wasn't a stranger. The guy started to take me out to his car. Now, to get the parking lot of this fair, you had to walk a long time, probably between 5 or 10 minutes. It was a huge field that they put into the fair. I asked him again where we were going, and he said we were going to go to McDonald's to get food. The closest McDonald's was almost an hour away. I had just ate too, so I wasn't hungry, and I wanted to go see my mom. I started to walk away, but he grabbed my arm and started walking me towards his truck. I froze. I knew this was a bad guy now, but I was in some sort of shock, and I couldn't move. I remember trying to scream, but all that came out was a strangled whisper. And I can remember crying without making a sound. We were right near his truck now, and he was trying to force me into the back seat when this young couple saw him. They must have seen me panicking and crying because the girl ran up and grabbed me and started screaming. The guy came over too, but the bad man was already in his truck. He literally ran the guy's foot over as he sped away. That young couple saved my life. I have no idea what that guy would have done to me if we actually got to where he was heading. I know it wasn't McDonald's. The couple walked me to the entrance, and the guy made an announcement that there was a missing child at the front. My mom and Jared arrived shortly after, and they were both crying. I remember running up to her and bursting into tears before whispering why she wanted that man to take me. She said she didn't know a man who tried to take me, and we hugged tighter and left. We didn't go back to the fair again that year, or at all the next year. My mom was paranoid that the guy was still there, looking for children. I got over it quickly and went on with my life. I only remembered it because my girlfriend wanted to go on that same ride that I did last year. So, scary child molester, let's not meet again.
Number 2.
I spent the first 10 years of my life in the city of San Jose, California. When my mother could afford it, she would take me to the theme park in the neighboring town of Sunnyvale called Great America. We went there about once or twice a year. The rides were fun, the food was good, and I wasn't paying, so I had a good time whenever we went. Except once, at around age 7. About an hour or two into the day, I got the feeling, you know the one, when you get this sneaking suspicion that someone you can't see is watching your every move. I mentioned it to my mom. She said I was just imagining things. We went on about our day, and it was fun as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling. All day it got steadily worse until I was literally begging my mom to take me home. Eventually, she obliged, but couldn't figure out what had gotten into me. Now, a little backstory. My parents got divorced when I was only a baby. When I was about 11, they reconnected and decided to get back together, and so we moved to a shitty little town up north called Eureka. My dad's dad, I refuse to refer to him as my grandfather, lived in the same town and never talked to anyone, not even my dad. He was, in every sense of the word, a recluse. He passed away not long after we moved there, and my dad, being his first kin, was tasked with going through his things. The first word that came to my mind when we entered the house was paranoid. There was at least one rifle in every room of the house, sometimes 2 or 3. There was a Colt 45 under his pillow, another under the driver's seat of his car, and a snub-nosed .38 in a Ziploc bag in the back pot of the toilet. Cameras were mounted on every exterior wall, and boxes upon boxes of VHS tapes with the collected recordings from these cameras, some of which were nearly worn out from repeated viewing. Suddenly, from the master bedroom, I hear my mom yell, "What the fuck?" My mom rarely swore in front of me, so I knew something was seriously wrong. I ran into the bedroom, and what I saw in my mom's hand shocked me to my core. It was a photo of me and my mother at the theme park. I was around 7, walking along with a corn dog in one hand, drink in the other hand, and I had a suspicious look on my face. I instantly remembered that day. My mother said she felt faint and left the room. As it turned out, there were around 30 pictures of us from that day, as well as some from other times and places, some of them taken from within arm's reach. I'd never felt more creeped out in my life, and haven't since. I don't know why he was spying on us, and I'm not sure I want to.
Number 3.
Just to clarify, I'm a female in my early 20s now. This happened when I was about 12 years old. I was in year 8, I'm guessing that is the same as 8th grade in America. Anyway, I was on my way home from school with my friend Kiera. Kiera was really small and had very childlike features. She was also extremely timid and easily scared. We decided to take a quick detour to the local supermarket for a drink and some snacks. Although this was frightening at the time, I am glad I made that detour, and you'll understand why very soon. We got into the shop and went straight to the sweets aisle. It was fairly empty. There was only me, Kiera, a young Muslim girl who stood staring at all the variety of sweets. She was smaller than Kiera, and like I said, Kiera was small. If I had to put an age on this girl, I would say she was about 7 or 8. I couldn't see her parents, but just assumed they had told her to choose some sweets and then return to them. I'm a very observant person naturally, and I will instantly react if I see someone in danger or figure out what to do if I notice anything suspicious. As we were browsing for sweets, I noticed in the corner of my eye, a man stood at the bottom of the aisle, staring. I ignored it for a moment, thinking he was checking what aisle he needed. But he stayed. He didn't move. I shot a glance over to him and tried to work out why he stood there. The man was also clearly a Muslim. I would say around the age of 30. For a second, I figured he must be her father, but something didn't seem right. He was staring blankly at her. I turned to the little girl, then back to the man. I did this several times, and with no doubt in my mind, I knew he was watching her. If he was with her, he surely would have walked over to her or called her name by now. He was not her father, her uncle, or her brother. I looked towards him again for a moment, and I could tell his eyes were so fixated on her that he hadn't noticed me staring at him. I looked away as not to stare too long, but it was bothering me. I could still see him in the corner of my eye. I need to intervene, I thought silently. Kiera had been talking continuously at this point, but somewhere in the conversation, I had switched off. She tugged on my arm, and I turned to her. Something had to be done. The girl's parents were nowhere in sight, and I knew I was the only person who could potentially stop whatever sick ideas this man had for this girl. I looked back at the sweets, but kept the little girl in the corner of my eye as I told Kiera to be quiet, and I explained what was going on. Shit, she whispered. What do we do? I had been thinking while she panicked. Brave but very naive 12-year-old me decided we'd go stand with the girl. We're going to walk over to her. As we stand next to her, you keep your eyes on the man. Do not take them off of him, Kiera. I'm going to ask her where her parents are. With that said, we walked towards the girl, one of us at either side of her. My heart was racing for fear of what his intentions were. I tend to get very angry when I'm afraid. My fear was solely for this girl. I knelt down beside her and said, "Hello, where are your parents?" She looked at me puzzled. I realized now that we looked like creeps, not him. "I'm not sure. They told me to grab what I wanted and then go find them." I looked at her face. So sweet. So innocent. I replied, "Would it be okay if we helped you find your parents?" I didn't want her to go find them alone in case the man got to her before they did. "Yes, please," she replied. Kiera never took her eyes off the creep the entire time I was speaking to the little girl. She said he looked angry and sort of confused at what was going on, and he walked away just before we took her to find her parents. I took her hand and hurried her along as we searched a few aisles for her mother and father. It didn't take long until we found them. I was relieved as she ran over to them and placed her sweets in the trolley. "Thank you," she said. Her parents looked at us with concern, so I approached them quickly to explain why she just thanked us. I told them that a man had been watching their daughter intensely for the past 5 minutes, and I was worried because I couldn't see her parents. They thanked me many times before I left the shop. I remember how terrified the mother looked as I told her. She shook my hand and thanked me again before we left. It's over, I thought. The little girl is safe, and I'm so glad I took a detour. Me and Kiera left the shop, and Kiera decided she didn't want to go home yet, so she insisted I come to her friend's house with her. Not today. I really need to go home, otherwise my dad will start to worry. She nodded and set off in the opposite direction. I began walking home alone. I felt strange. Something in my gut was telling me to turn around. I walked through the car park and past the usual shops. And then I turned. He was behind me, merely yards away. As soon as I caught his eyes, I turned around and picked up pace. My heart was pounding. I was only 12. I knew I couldn't outrun a grown man, and I was way too small to fight him. "Think," I screamed in my head. I kept passing shop after shop. No one was around. It was roughly an hour after school ended by this point, and all the school kids had been to the local shops and gone home, usually in large groups. The sweet shop, I thought to myself. At the top of this path I was on was a small sweet shop. Nearly all the kids from the school flocked there after school ended for their cheap sweets. I knew there was a security guard inside. He was always there. He watched out for the kids stealing sweets. If I can get to the shop before it closes, I'll be safe, I thought. Yes, it closed early on school days as the only customers were us kids. I was hoping for dear life the shutters weren't down. I knew if it was closed, I didn't stand a chance. My route home was simple, but not so much if you're being chased. After I passed that shop, I had to turn right under a bridge, then climb large stone stairs to walk over the bridge, to then walk up to a large hill to get home. I didn't stand a chance. Not to mention, I had severe asthma. That was made worse when I was panicked or nervous. I picked up as much pace as possible without running. I didn't want him to think I was aware that I was being followed. He was walking at a steady pace, but keeping his eyes glued to me. Suddenly, as I was about to reach the shop, I saw the security guard. He stepped out of the shop just as I reached it. I scurried over to him and told him everything that was going on. I told him what had happened in the supermarket and that the guy was following me. I felt my heart pounding as the man slowly crept closer. "I have about a half mile to walk. Please." He cut me off. He looked angry. "Go now. Don't stop walking." I'll stop him, and I'll keep him here as long as I can. Don't look back. Just move as fast as you can. I ran around the corner and heard the security guard say, "Stop!" I walked further. I knew he wouldn't let him hurt me. I felt okay. That feeling in my stomach had gone. I was gonna be okay. I reached home with no problem. I never told my dad or grandparents, but like I say, I've always been cautious, and even if I put myself at risk, I'm glad I was able to help that little girl.
Number 4.
A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me, and before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called, but he didn't answer, so my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me.
Are you coming?
Yes. He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking. But I just thought, maybe he was older. Yes, we're in front of the house now. He got extremely upset.
We?
Yeah, my boyfriend's with me.
You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that.
It had never crossed my mind to have to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause, he said,
I'm sorry, it's just sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon.
Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay, in case this place was the place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're going to view. This man was very young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're both really weirded out, but this isn't enough for us to bail just yet, and we look at each other wondering what to do. The landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "What from?" my boyfriend asks. "Work," is the flat reply. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time, he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving into this town too? I try to give answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, apropos of nothing, "Let me show you the basement." At this point, I should have noped out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking this was an eccentric old man from a small town, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door, and we saw that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, and the light didn't come on. Normally, the response for this is, "Oh shit, the light's out," or something like that. But he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. And then he stood there, without moving, in the dark and said,
Aren't you coming down?
"There's nothing to see if the light's out," says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically. And when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to get it open, secretly though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed deranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things 20-something-year-olds might be reading. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge, or pantry, or utensils for that matter. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished, there was furniture up there, it would smell bad. The last one I believed, because standing near the door, it smelt terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of the door. The man walked us out, pretended to go to his car to leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, he slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, Googled the man that night. We found out 3 things. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople. That there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company, as he claimed on Craigslist, and that he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring. The house where the grad student lived. So that was the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me.
Number 5.
Not too long ago, I put up a post on Craigslist asking to either sell or trade my fish tank for a smaller one. I put in my phone number as the contact source and asked to text only. After a couple of hours, I got a text from someone who was willing to trade. We agreed to meet at a Walmart in a couple of days when we were both free and do our trade. During those days, the guy kept on texting me involving small talk. He asked me about my name and where I worked. And me being a foolish person, I answered his questions. I use Craigslist often, and I have never really had a bad experience with anyone, so I really thought this guy was just weird. I thought that he was just trying to be friendly. I told this guy what car I drove and what college I went to, again, never really stopping to think what kind of info I was giving a total stranger. When the day came to meet this guy, he told me he could only meet me after 10 p.m. I thought that was odd, but agreed to meet him anyway since my poor fish were already stuck in a 5-gallon jug. So me and my boyfriend drove to the Walmart at about 10:15 and got there in 20 minutes. The guy texted me and said he was already there in an old yellow Camaro. I replied saying, "We're here in a gray Ford." He then texted me and said, "Who is we?" At that moment, I realized something was really off with this guy, and I replied saying, "My husband and me." That was a lie, but I felt he should know I wasn't alone. He never responded after that text. My boyfriend and I went around the parking lot a couple of times looking for the yellow Camaro, but we never found it. I tried calling the guy, and he ignored my calls. We decided it best to just leave. I don't know what would have happened if I'd met this creep by myself, or even with my boyfriend there, but I have a feeling it would not have been something good. I removed the post from Craigslist that night, and saved the creep's phone number just in case he tried contacting me again. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from several different phone numbers asking about the tank. I never responded to anyone because I believe it was the same guy, since I for sure deleted the post immediately. I hope he can't somehow track my phone, and of course, I'm not using Craigslist anymore.
Number 6.
When I was 13, I went through a bad rebellion stage. I was hanging out with much older people and was drinking all the time. So one night, my friend Tracy and her sister invited me to party with them. We were all pretty drunk, sitting in a parking lot talking to some guys we knew. Creepy guy pulls up in his beat-up car and offers us all some whiskey. I was already fairly trashed, but like the other girls, we shared the bottle. Shortly thereafter, I passed out in the back seat of my friend's Chevy. This is where it gets bad. Mr. Creeper proceeds to unbutton my pants and try to put his hands down them. Tracy's sister Shelly grabbed him and said, "Leave her alone." This dude is like, "But she's cute as hell." Tracy was like, "But she's trashed and she's not legal, so bug off." Well, anyway, the girls took me home. That's not the end though. I delivered the area shopper at the time. And about a week later, Creeper saw me and started following me around as I delivered papers. He was yelling at me about how I have a great body and how gorgeous I am. He kept telling me if I'd just go for a ride with him, he'd make me feel so good. Well, even at 13, I was no idiot, so I booked it to the local police station where my uncle was an officer. Come to find out, this dude had done this before and was out on parole for sexually abusing another 13-year-old and raping a teenager. He was taken into custody. So, Mr. Creepy Dude, I hope you didn't make it out of prison again to mess with young girls.
Number 7.
Last June, my guy and I were living with our roommates and our 2 kids. Our roommates decided to leave and only gave us 3 weeks' notice on a month-to-month lease. We were already planning on leaving ourselves in a couple months, but with the short notice, we decided that we just had to find a place somewhere, anywhere. Luckily, we both worked remotely, so we had the ability to move anywhere in the state. For 2 weeks, we searched every rental site on the internet that we could find. This eventually led us to Craigslist. Yeah, Craigslist. We had multiple rejections from landlords who weren't willing to work on deposit, which is understandable. However, one was open to the idea. She was a nice older woman in the state with an approved realtor profile. I googled her. The house was perfect. It was a side-by-side duplex which would be fine for a little while, cute little kitchen, and a backyard. The crime rate didn't look too bad, and a school close by. She accepted large dogs, which was perfect, and the deposit wasn't too high. After some researching online and talking, we made arrangements to move into the home. When we left our old home, we took off to finally see our new humble abode. We dropped off the kids at my mom's for safety's sake and went on our way. The drive was awful. We were lost left and right and even nearly ended up in the wrong town. Eventually, we were able to find an ATM to pay for the rent and deposit. After getting lost and yelling at one another on the freeway for another 45 minutes in the middle of absolute nowhere with limited reception and having to find a place to call her, we lost reception again, but we eventually found the gate where she met us to let us in. Something was off immediately. She seemed fidgety and nervous. She didn't look like her pictures. She kept wiping her nose with her sleeve, saying she was sick. She was a little older, and maybe like she had been on drugs at some point, or maybe still. We went through the gate and drove about a half-mile down to her home. Apparently, her office was also her home. I didn't know that. The property was filled with old trucks, boats, and buses. It was like a graveyard for oversized vehicles. My boyfriend, completely frustrated, looked at me, and in his failed attempt at humor, blurted out, "Well, we're either going to get a house, or we're going to die. Let's find out." We parked and met with the woman outside. She seemed really anxious and was telling us random things about her many projects. I assumed tweaker. Sorry, but that's just what I assumed, and it's a common problem in the area. We went inside the house, which strangely was well decorated and very modern. The rest of the house was a little trashy. She claimed her office was flooded and we just have to sign the paperwork there. We agreed. My boyfriend and I signed the paperwork, but when we realized we were missing $200, he felt secure enough to leave me to check the car to see if it was missing. She went on to tell me about the house and the arrangements, random things. The key is by the light outside. They said there's a washer and dryer in the garage below. We don't know anything about that, but you might want to go in there. It might be kind of icky. They also said there's a crawl space where somebody can get in. I'm not sure what they're talking about, but just to be careful and make sure it's okay. She was incredibly adamant about not having been at the home for quite some time. Okay, I realize that's the part where I should have definitely paid attention, but it was such a chaotic day, and I was so exhausted that I just said, "Okay, sure." I shrugged it off. I just wanted to get the hell home. My boyfriend came back in, and she said the missing amount was fine, so we could just tack on the missing amount to the next month's rent. Perfect. We thanked her, and were on our way. New lease in hand. We picked up the kids and drove another hour to the home. The entire drive, we were watching the miles down to the town and counting down. 15, 10, 5. Then we arrived. It was an old 3-story building duplex. Not a 2-story, but a 3-story. The town was eerily depressing. Have you ever seen Gumo? It's a spitting image of Gumo. Actually, I lived in this same town as a kid with my dad sometimes. It was literally 1983. There were mullets and 1980s tank tops, children playing outside, while their meth-addicted parents smoked on the porches and chugged cheap redneck beers like water. It was hot, but the sky was dark and gray. Even the power lines were hanging down and about to fall. There were drug addicts walking around and small children playing outside. Other children played by themselves, running their bikes through the streets unsupervised. This was not Mayberry. That beautiful yard had grown into a jungle. This duplex was practically abandoned and nobody was living in the other side. My boyfriend and I looked at one another with a sense of dread. "Is this it?" I asked. This is it. This is where we live now," he told me. He grabbed the key by the light and we walked into the house. It was worse. The floor was covered in water. The fridge had been leaking for a while, and the power wasn't on yet. We had called the company earlier that day, and they said we would have to wait a week to turn it on. There was a cup of coffee left on the kitchen counter. I noticed the locks had been recently changed, and the door had obviously been broken into several times, so much that the locks were completely useless. There was like this weird gap between the door and the frames. There was a horrible smell, like the stench of rotting flesh or something. My boyfriend went to grab the things while I watched our kids. I walked in the living room. The house had been painted that day. It was roasting inside, and the smell between the paint, the smell of mold, an overwhelming smell of death. I had to open a window. I tried. He tried. The windows were broken and painted shut. The pictures online had to have been from a few years ago. The place was a train wreck. Whoever painted the house painted quickly and got the hell out of there. It was poorly done. Even the door handles were painted. They painted the walls, ceiling, banisters, and even the stairs this ugly, depressing salmon pink color. That instantly set me off. "I think there was blood in here," I told my boyfriend. "Why do you say that?" he asked, dropping down more boxes into the office. "That's the only reason to paint it this god-awful color. Blood would seep through white paint eventually, and it's impossible to get rid of." The only reason I knew this is because I remember hearing about a news story where a woman took over a murder house. As I walked further into the living room, I realized there was a huge bleach stain about 2 feet wide on the dark carpet. The house was lifted so high with the garage or basement, whatever it was below. I didn't understand how it could feel like it had been flooded or why the carpet was so badly wrinkled. We scoped out the house and went upstairs to the bedrooms. The windows were so low to the ground and hanging open, and I just thought, this is not safe for kids. There was a bucket of paint with the paint roller still inside, randomly left behind in what would have been our bedroom. I stood by the window, which was only about maybe 2 feet high. It must have been about 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, no guards, and was completely open. There wasn't even a screen. I could have sworn I saw a flash of light while I stared down 3 stories below from the death trap. Call it whatever you want, but I instantly had a vision of a woman with long hair falling out the window and crashing down on the ground below. I didn't tell my boyfriend. I had to get out from upstairs and just took the kids. About 10 minutes later, the smell of death was making it impossible for me to breathe. I had to go to the bathroom. We had been driving for hours that day, but the moment I stepped in, I noticed the mirrored bathroom cabinets were cracked, left open, and a toilet paper holder shoved inside in parts. I walked in a little more and noticed the red spots on the shower walls and a sealed tampon in the middle of the floor. I don't think the maintenance man had any use for a tampon, and it looked as if though someone had gotten the hell out of there and did so quickly. I was about to go in, but something held me back, and a little voice in my head said, "Don't go into the bathroom." So I didn't. My boyfriend was sitting in the car. He said it was too hot and needed some air. I looked down below out the living room window and noticed that there were groups of people walking by and making comments about someone being in the house. Those people being us. I was trying to come up with every positive reason to stay here. I kept coming up with excuses like, it's not so bad. Maybe it just needs a woman's touch. Maybe flowers will make it better. Maybe some air freshener. Maybe like 10 bottles of air freshener. And a lot of bleach. I kept trying to convince myself by looking around and thinking how to make it work. I opened up the closet and then peeked inside to see that it had led further down behind the wall. Keep in mind, this house was probably built in the very early 1900s and is around 100 years old, if not more. It wasn't uncommon back then for secret rooms and passageways to exist. It's so hard to explain the feeling I had, but as I was about to peek around inside to see the back of the closet, something came over me. I knew that if I had gone any further, my kids and I wouldn't be alive. Everything felt so heavy, and I was about to throw up. This was the closest I had ever felt in my entire life to not just death, but hell. Pure evil. I can't even possibly explain the amount of dread and discomfort. I was so uncomfortable. My son, who was always positive, came closer, excited and shouting, "Is that another room?" I full on went pissed off Mother Bear, pushed him away, and closed the door. Suddenly, the words that the landlord had told me ran through my head again. They said there's a crawl space where someone could get in. Just then, I heard something else in the house. Something like someone moving around, somewhere around behind the closet area. I stood there for a moment and had the eerie thought creep into my head, "You're all going to die here if you stay." That very thought sent me into a panic, and with my heart pounding, I quickly grabbed my kids and ran out to the car. I could tell that my boyfriend was visibly upset with the home, giving me an opportunity to skip beating around the bush. "Hey, let's just go," I told him. I was a little bit hysterical, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was on the lines of, "It will be fine, we'll find something. We don't belong here. We need to get the fuck out. Let's just go. I don't care. I'm not mad. Let's just fucking go." He was relieved. Neither of us wanted to disappoint the other, but after talking things through, it turned out we had the same feeling of dread and death in us. He was just afraid of dying, as I was. I was absolutely positive that one night, that place would have killed us. I asked him to take pictures so that the landlord would know the situation. As we were leaving, we noticed that there was actually another window on our side of the duplex, which we believed was the secret room. I heard the neighbors across the street laughing and saying something like, "Looks like they're leaving." That didn't last long. We slept in the car for an hour or so at a nearby gas station. We were so exhausted. I cried, of course, and then called my mom to see if we could stay the night. My boyfriend did his best to comfort me, and we explained to the landlord we didn't move in, that we had taken pictures and there were multiple health code violations. We would send them if she needed them. She didn't even hesitate or want to see the photos, and within minutes offered to write a check for our money back. Bless her heart. I swear there was someone else in that house. It still terrifies me to talk about it, and I'll never rent a site unseen again. By the way, that's not the end. That feeling haunted me for weeks, so much I couldn't sleep. Even my dreams were haunting me, with the image of that woman falling out of the window. I eventually Googled the address to find out who had lived there before us. I found a woman's name. I Googled that woman's name, and she's dead. She was beaten to death with a baseball bat, apparently stabbed, allegedly, by her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend. They stuffed the body in a car for weeks after hiding it in a garage, and it was found a couple of hours away. I don't believe that the news story says that the murder took place in that house. I still don't even know, but it feels like it was involved somehow. Or something else happened. I'm not sure. I just know one thing. Someone is hiding something, and I definitely believe that someone else was in that house.
Number 8.
So this happened about 9 or 10 years ago, but I will never forget it. At the time, I was about 11 or 12 years old. I was a competitive softball player, and my team was nationally ranked, so we traveled all over the United States to play. This resulted in long car rides, sometimes through the night. One night in particular, it was about midnight, and we were on our way to a tournament in who knows where. I'd been sleeping in the car when we stopped at a gas station for a bathroom break. My teammate, who was also around 9 or 10, and I decided to stay in the car while our moms went inside because we really didn't have to go. A few moments after the moms had left, locking us in the car, I noticed another car in the parking lot. It was a few spaces over and was the only other car at the station at the time. I noticed a middle-aged man and a little girl who was about 6 to 8 years old, who I assumed was his daughter because she looked strikingly similar to him in this car. I met eyes with the daughter, and she smiled at me. I smiled back and waved because she was adorable. The little girl then said something to the man, and he looked at me and smiled too. I went back to minding my own business as the man went into the store and left his daughter in the car. When I looked back at the little girl, she was looking at me with a scared look on her face. She started hitting the windows and motioning for me to come over to the car. Instantly, My adrenaline went into overdrive. This girl was really acting like she needed help. My mind was racing. What if this man had kidnapped her and she needed my help? My initial thought was that he was her father, but you never know. I just had no idea what to do. I turned to my friend, who had gone back to sleep, and tried to wake her up, but she just shot me a dirty look and went back to sleep. Turning back to the girl, I was about to get out of the car to go talk to her when I saw she had made eye contact with the man in the store who was just standing there, watching through the window. He smiled at her and nodded seemingly approvingly. She smiled back and then turned to me and instantly went back to trying to get me to come over to the car. After seeing the exchange, I thought something was off. It seemed the girl was acting at the direction of the man. I then decided I was not getting out of the car and would just tell my mom about it when she got back. Because hey, I was aware that I was a little girl myself, and what the heck could I do? Next thing I know, the man is returning to the car. He hadn't brought anything and had basically been standing in the window watching the whole time. When he got in the car, they started having a conversation, occasionally glancing at me. Eventually, the little girl shrugged and he kind of patted her on the shoulder. They started to pull out of the parking lot, and I glanced at the girl one last time and saw she was looking right at me with a huge smile. I was so creeped out, but didn't tell my mom when she returned to the car because I was still so confused and shocked about what had just happened. For a little bit, I didn't tell anyone because I felt bad that I hadn't done anything, when that little girl could have actually been in trouble. But thinking back, after I had gotten over the initial shock, I concluded that the man was using his daughter to try and lure me to the car by making me believe she was in some type of trouble. Who knows what would have happened? But my guess is he would have run out from his watching spot and put me in the car and drove off. The creepiest thing is, it seemed so orchestrated. I was sure this was not the first time they'd done this. So, creepy man and his equally creepy but super talented daughter, I'm glad we didn't meet, and let's not plan on ever doing so.
Number 9.
I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large shops and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get my needs. I needed to buy a backpack for when I leave for university, one better than the one I already had, so I turned to Craigslist as I normally do. As a student, I prefer to go for the cheap option. Craigslist usually provides that. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good looking bag at only £15. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately what struck me was this guy's accent. It was obvious that he wasn't Scottish or even from the UK. He sounded Polish or something. He said that he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live. But when I told him the area I was from, he reluctantly offered to come to my house to give it to me. And this all seemed strange, being that the sale was only for £15. Nonetheless, I foolishly gave him my fucking address. He said he'd drop by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to like 10 p.m., I was thinking that he wasn't going to come. But around 10:20, there was a chap at the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window and around to the front door just to be sure, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a backpack in his hand. Slightly relieved that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened it up. It was the guy on the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking out £30 because of the trouble he went to bring it here, and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing, so I hugged him and he left. I was still confused that he came all this way just for 15 pounds, but I didn't find it overly strange. Boy, was I wrong. At around midnight, I was finishing another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut, which was really weird for this time of night, and in my area, the nearest house is like a quarter-mile away, and I rarely see the people that live there. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had, but he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point when I heard the back gate opening. I fucking nearly shit myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen where the back door is, staying low down the way there to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both doors were still unlocked. I grabbed the keys from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, I got a fright at the security light turning on in the back garden. It's a motion sensor that turns on. I looked up to see that it was him again. He had a creepy smile on his face, no teeth showing, just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Dude, what the fuck are you doing back here?" He said nothing, and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in, and I took the keys from the back door, then bolted to the front door to lock it. About halfway to the front door, I heard a window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at the fact that he's probably making his way into the house. I made a turn to go up the stairs towards the toilet so I could lock myself in. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling and broken glass falling to the floor. He was in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly dialed 999. I told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get officers out to me as fast as possible. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would get here generally quickly. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked up the stairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said,
I know you're in there, Cameron."
Hearing him say my name made my stomach churn. I screamed, "The police are coming! Just back the fuck off, man!" After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then, in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom windows. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors open outside and fast footsteps. I heard the front door open, and then, "Police officer with a taser, drop the knife!" Again, I felt sick knowing he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard, "Taser! Taser!" and the guy screaming. Then a thump. After he came through, they officially arrested him for attempted murder and trespassing. I've pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail. After that, he'll be free to come right back. I'm now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible.
Number 10.
I went to university in a small town, less than 5,000 people. The majority of the population is made up of students, but of course there are also locals. I never had a problem with any of the locals before, but they could be a tad strange. So anyway, about 7 months ago, I was at the grocery store around 6 p.m. buying food for dinner. I was in the dairy aisle looking for cottage cheese. We were making lasagna, when, from behind me, this man asked why I was buying cottage cheese. I turn around, and there's a man standing there, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with a long greasy ponytail and dirty clothes. Something about him made me uncomfortable. However, I'm very polite and a little too nice, so I engaged in the conversation with him. "I'm making lasagna tonight, and the recipe calls for it."
"I'm a professional chef. Let me tell you that you should not be using cottage cheese. You should be using ricotta."
So I said thanks for the advice, and picked up the ricotta. I was about to walk away when he continued the conversation. He was going on about really weird things, like how he used to have a white tiger as a pet and how he makes homemade hot sauce out of his home. At this point, I had probably been standing there listening to him for 20 minutes.
Do you like hot sauce?
Yeah, sure, sometimes.
You should come to my place and make hot sauce with me. I just live up the mountain.
No, thank you. It's okay. The man starts getting really pushy and trying to persuade me to go to his house. Finally, this woman who was overhearing our conversation and who could see I was getting very unnerved said it was time for him to be on his way. He then proceeds to give me his business card, which I may add was clearly homemade on regular printer paper and cut with scissors. He tells me to call him whenever I want to make hot sauce or have a drink. He went to the cash to pay for his stuff, and I watched to make sure he left before going to pay for my things. When I walked out of the grocery store, he was standing outside waiting for me. Now, I'm really freaked out, and I have a good 15-minute walk ahead of me. He asks me how I'm getting home, and I didn't want to say I was walking, so I told him I was going to catch a cab.
We'll share a cab.
No.
Just share a cab with me.
He was starting to get so angry. I flagged down a cab, and I jumped in. He tries to get in the back, but I told the cab driver that I don't know this man, and I don't want him to be sharing a cab with me. As we were driving away, I can hear him yell,
"Fucking bitch!"
Pretty shaken up at this point. The cab driver drops me off at my house, and when I get out, I see a car with the creepy man from the grocery store in it parked 2 houses down. He not only followed me to my house, but also had a car of his own. There was no reason for him to want to take a taxi with me. Now, I was super scared and hurried inside. Thank God my 2 other roommates were home. I told them everything that happened. One of my roommate's boyfriend was on his way over, so we decided to wait for him to get there before we did anything else. But he just stayed there in his car, watching our house for a good 15 minutes. When he saw my friend's boyfriend show up, he drove away, and I haven't seen him since. I then remembered that he gave me his business card, and I wanted to look him up online. First of all, the business card was for some photoshopping company, not a chef. I typed the name and business into Google, and nothing came up. His name did not exist, and the company didn't exist either. I reported this incident to the police, but they said there was not much they could do since he didn't technically do anything. I'm not sure if this is related or not, but I have a gut feeling it was. Less than a week later, my roommates had a class at 8:30 a.m., and I was still sleeping since I didn't have class until noon. I guess whoever last left forgot to lock the door. About an hour after they left, I woke up to the front door being closed. Thinking it was just one of my roommates, I thought the door would have been locked, so whoever it was would have needed a key. I just stayed in bed. I heard someone go into my roommate's room right next to mine, thinking it was her. Then, a few moments later, I hear someone try my door. I lock it when I'm sleeping, and they knocked. But I was so tired, I didn't want to get up and open it, so I just pretended to be asleep. Well, thank God for that, because none of my roommates were home, and it was actually an intruder. I heard whoever it was leave through the back door, which I thought was weird, so I got up and got dressed, and when I went out, no one was there. But it turns out whoever it was stole my roommate's laptop and a picture we have in our living room of us 4 girls. I reported all this to the police, but never really heard anything back from it. I had lots of trouble sleeping and feeling safe in my own house after this incident. To this day, this experience creeps me out, and I don't want to imagine what would have happened if I opened my bedroom door to whoever was knocking.